Review columnist John Derbyshire argues that if conservatives had not lost their traditionally gloomy outlook during the 2008 election, then Barack Obama would not have won the White House. He debates former Fox News Channel host Alan Colmes.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thanks for showing up here this evening. I'm John Derbyshire, author of this book, We Are Doomed, Reclaiming Conservative Pessimism. So I'm here to sell you some pessimism, whether you're a conservative or not. I actually wanted to call the book We Are Doomed, Doomed, comma, doomed, but my publisher said that was too many dooms. The book itself is a sort of exercise in attitude adjustment. It's addressed to Americans of a conservative temperament who I think have been getting much too cheerful. It argues that the proper posture for conservatives, especially in the times we live in, is one of pessimism. It's a darker view of what's possible in human nature and human society. My own ideal of the conservative, I don't think I'd be giving much away if I tell you, is someone like Calvin Coolidge. The green eye shade, thin-lipped, skeptical, and patient conservatives of old. We seem to have run out of them. I am a fan of Ronald Reagan with some qualifications which you'll find in the text and which I may mention as we go along. So I'm talking to conservatives. Anybody else who wants to listen is welcome to. And I'm telling them, you've gone astray because you've placed too much faith in optimistic nostrums. You've swallowed too much of the liberal Kool-Aid. Optimism is for liberals. And if you attain a darker view of human possibility, you'll ultimately be more successful. Because let's face it, the path we've been treading has not been very successful for conservatives. I give the numbers in the book, numbers of things like the proportion of the gross domestic product swallowed up by government at all levels, the failure of our schools, our chaotic immigration policy, and so on. All of these have been driven by liberal ideas, but often to the shame of conservatives, ideas carried in the heads of people promoting themselves as conservatives. As well as being an exercise in attitude adjustment aimed at conservatives, it's also a bit of a vent against the George W. Bush years. I'm going to confess up front that I voted for George W. Bush twice, in each case, faute de mieux, because the alternative was just too awful. But as time went on, over those George W. Bush years, I became first more and more dissatisfied, and then more and more angry at what was being done by a president who'd been sold to us as conservative. And, of course, by the people he brought in with him and the people who cheered him on. So it's an attitude adjustment book, and it's also a bit of a vent. I have a lot to say about broad social and cultural issues. In fact, thematically, the book is divided into chapters, each one of which seizes on some particular aspect of our society or our culture. And I'll just read out those chapter headings to you so that you can see the thematic structure. My first chapter is just a general call to pessimism, to tell you what I'm trying to do. In the second chapter, I tackle the great modern cult of diversity, which I think has been a disaster for the United States. In my third chapter, I tackle politics, and I show how our politics has gone astray from our original constitutional ideals. Then I take on culture, mostly high culture, simply because I'm a high culture kind of guy. But I do take a poke at popular culture too. My fifth chapter is called Sex. And the argument there is that women, in the generality, are more inclined to socialist and liberal ideas than are men. So that a feminization of our society would be a very bad thing for conservatives. And that such feminization is actually happening, and therefore we are doomed. In my next chapter, I take on education, which is, once I got into my stride there, was like shooting fish in a barrel, because our education system at all levels has so many things wrong with it. And not only does it have so many things wrong with it, but the reasons why those things are wrong with it have been ruled out of polite speech, and therefore we can't fix the things that are wrong with it. In my next chapter, number 7, I really take wing and have a go at human nature in all its generality. After all, if I'm arguing that conservatives haven't been pessimistic enough about what's possible, much of what we do and what people in the policy area, down to lowly commentators like myself and Alan, much of what we do rests on certain notions about human nature, about what human beings are, how they stand in relation to the rest of the universe, and what we can reasonably hope to change when we think it's wrong. My next chapter, which is already getting me in trouble with some of my fellow conservatives, is about religion. I'm a sort of unwilling unbeliever. I'm an unbeliever. But I'm broadly sympathetic to religion for reasons that I spell out in this chapter. And I think it's broadly a good thing for America that we are still a religious nation. But I don't see how we can stay that religious. I think there are things eating away at what is good about religious America. And therefore we are doomed. In my next chapter, I tackle war. So you see, I'm giving broad, general subject headings here. Mostly, of course, the Iraq war, which has been most in our minds the last few years. Now everybody's talking about Afghanistan, but if you look at the newspapers, that really only came up in the last few months. The Iraq war has been the most expensive and the biggest expedition, military expedition, of the past 20 years. And that's the one I'm mostly talking about. But I have some generalities there too, again, about what you can hope to accomplish with military means. For example, I don't think you can hope to accomplish the transformation of backward societies into Jeffersonian democracies. My next chapter takes on immigration, which again gets us back to the fish barrel, because there are so many things wrong. You can hardly write anything without pointing out what's wrong. My task, given the theme that I've set myself, is to show that what is wrong rests on liberal or leftist presumptions taken up gleefully by people formerly thought to be conservative. In chapter 11, I take a walk around the world and just look at the awful state the world is in. And I set the tone of it with an old Yiddish joke. A fellow goes to a tailor to be measured for a suit. Customer, how long will it take to make the suit? Tailor, a month. Customer, a month? It only took the good Lord 6 days to make the whole world. Tailor, yes, and just look at it. So that's my little tour of the world. I have one section on Asia, one on Africa, one on Latin America, one on Europe. And then in my last topic chapter, I discussed the economy and the dismal future that awaits us as the dollar devalues and we all get poorer and the middle class slowly disappears. And then I wrap up with a little bit of philosophy and literature, returning to the main theme. So that's the book. It's a book of polemic, but if you've seen the photograph on the back cover, you will have surmised that it's not intended altogether seriously. There is no index. There is no bibliography. This is not a Heritage Foundation position paper. This is me sounding off, which, incredibly, it still seems to me, you can get paid for doing. I'll be glad to take any questions, and then I think Alan is going to come and hurl darts at me across a table, which should be fun. And I think we have somebody with a mop to mop up the blood afterwards.
So at this point, let me ask the obvious question, which would be the obvious paradox that your book seems to raise, which is, if I am a conservative who believes that the conservative prescription for what's wrong with this world is the correct one, why would pessimism advance that?
Well, you can take this book at a light level as being a call to lowered expectations. If you expect too much of people and you base your schemes and your policies, your schemes for political improvement on too high hopes of people, your schemes will fail. The great totalitarian despotisms of the 20th century taught us that. The Great Revolution, well, in fact, even the French Revolution in the 18th century was also based on too high expectations of human beings. Human beings are not perfectible. And if you conduct a revolution or a reform on the basis that they are, you will end with disaster. The French Revolution ended with Napoleon's armies straggling back from Moscow. You know, the Russian Revolution ended in Stalin's tyranny. A realistic, low expectations view of humanity is best. And if in doubt, expect less. You probably won't be disappointed. You see, it's a totally different answer. Isn't that good how I do that? But then now the people watching won't know what I'm talking about.
I hope I don't have to repeat this question, but if I do, that's okay. You refer back to Calvin Coolidge. I just wonder if what you are pointing toward as the correct form of conservatism would be the type that prevailed in the U.S. during Teddy Roosevelt's period, Taft's period, extending after Wilson to Calvin Coolidge, which included protective tariffs of a moderate sort and anti-monopoly legislation.
Yeah, you know, you can only do so much with the world, and as was it Snoopy used to say, you can never go back. I'm a great admirer of Coolidge, and indeed of Harding, great president. But we're not going to go back to Coolidge's America. Nobody thinks we are. But there's a kind of a spirit there, a spirit of restraint. I think that would be a key word. Restraint and skepticism that he deployed to great effect. I don't want to get too scholarly, but there's a school of philosophy in Chinese called Taoism, and they have a holy book called the Book of the Way, and in the Book of the Way it says,